Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, right in the midst of one of the great sports times of the year. Basketball national championship last night. Masters comes up this weekend. Braves off to a nice start with their road trip to begin the season, coming home to end the week. We got so many great things going on in the world of sports, but obviously Georgia football and its own spring practice, getting ready for G-Day on April 15th, also a very big part of all of that as well. We're going to continue our conversation about that, looking at quarterback a little bit today, looking at running back a little bit today, and some very candid comments from Kirby Smart about transfers and how Georgia's kind of avoided some of the transfer hysteria that seems to dominate so much of the rest of college football. We also have two special guests on hand for today's show there as well. We'll tell you more about that coming up. It is a very busy show, and we are so happy to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We are absolutely loaded on today's show. Before we're done, it's a Tuesday. That means the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, joins us for a Kroger Fresh Take. I've gotten to where Jake's appearance on our show, one of my favorite parts of the week. I know he'll have plenty of good things to say here today. We'll look forward to doing that coming up here in a little bit. Also, normally on Tuesdays, Connor Riley, a part of our DawgNation team, he joins us. Connor actually taking a little bit of vacation right now, so we have a special guest who pinch hit in place of him. How about Mike Johnson? Some of you remember years ago, Mike used to make regular appearances on our show. He and I did SEC Country Live together. Mike, the former Alabama All-American, former Atlanta Falcon, now a part of a brand new show each and every day here in the Atlanta area where I live. I'll tell you more about this here coming up. I think it's kind of a fun, cool thing. So we got a lot to do as a part of the show. But what do you say before we get into any of that? Let's talk quarterback here for a minute. Hot topic on yesterday's show. We'll make it a part of today's show here as well. I'm going to use some words from an ESPN analyst as I springboard into all of this. Greg McElroy, former Alabama quarterback, ESPN analyst, you see him doing games, things like that all the time, has his own podcast there as well, and he was making his prediction for the Georgia quarterback, who the eventual starter would be. Maybe not a surprise that he picked Carson Beck, but some of his reasoning as to why I think is pretty interesting. Some of this I think he's probably spot on with. Some of this maybe not quite so spot on with it all. But nonetheless, here is Greg McElroy from ESPN on his podcast making the case for Carson Beck being the starting quarterback for Georgia here this year, and big things expected from McElroy for Beck if it does play out that way. Here is Greg McElroy.
I think Carson Beck's a real NFL prospect. If you already look at some of the additions that Kirby Smart has made in the portal, he's already kind of showing his hand that it's probably going to be Carson Beck as the starting quarterback. And you take it one step further. All the top 50 quarterback recruits from 2017 to 2020. Carson Beck is the only quarterback that didn't start at any point in his first 3 years that didn't transfer. He's the only one. Why do you think that is? Because either something was promised to him or he knew the light at the end of the tunnel would result in him becoming the starting quarterback for a national championship contender and likely heading into the season, the national championship preseason favorite. So I think Carson Beck has waited his turn and as a fourth-year junior is primed and positioned to become the guy.
So I think that's interesting from Greg McElroy. There are a couple of things there that I think are almost self-evidently true, and then there's one big thing that I think he probably gets wrong. First of all, there is certainly nothing wrong with predicting Carson Beck to win the Georgia starting quarterback job. I do believe he's in real competition right now. It sounds like on the basis of some of what we're hearing that Brock Vandagriff is actually demonstrating himself to be a pretty capable player in his own right. So for now, that seems like it's a real competition. But assuming that Beck eventually wins that competition and eventually becomes the Georgia starting quarterback, I'm guessing more people than not probably agree with Greg McElroy on that. In fact, they may even say it more emphatically even than that, that Beck will eventually be the guy, even if he is being pushed by Brock Vandagriff right now. The other thing that McElroy says there that I also kind of agree with too is that if Beck does emerge as the Georgia starter, he will step into that offense this season with a chance to have a very successful season, put up a big stat line, keep Georgia in the same sort of level of national championship contention it's been the last 2 years as the back-to-back winner, and possibly even propel himself to a very bright NFL future too. That if Beck emerges as the guy, I think you ought to have high expectations that Beck steps in, plays well enough to kind of lead Georgia back in the national championship conversation, and well enough that he's a big part of the NFL draft conversation after that. Those expectations, in other words, aren't too high for Carson Beck. But the part that McElroy says that I probably think is worth kind of pushing back on a little bit is the whole notion of why it is that Beck hasn't transferred. I think it's interesting that McElroy points out that if you look at the time frame in which Beck came to Georgia and look at other quarterbacks of a similar stature around college football, they've essentially all transferred. They've either had their moment in the sun or they've gone somewhere else. That obviously when you kind of bring in that sort of 5-star or 4-star level quarterback, the expectation is that if you don't use them right away, they're going to be bolting out the door and going somewhere else. That obviously hasn't happened for Beck at Georgia. McElroy makes the assumption of, well, maybe Kirby Smart made some sort of promise to Greg McElroy. And for those of you who are big Georgia fans who follow this program closely, does that sound like something that Kirby Smart would do? Hey, if you'll just stay here, I promise you'll be the starting quarterback. I'm not quite so sure that Kirby Smart is in the position of promising anybody anything, nor does he have to. Kirby has won back-to-back national championships. He is not in need of anyone to save this program with it on top of the college football world the way that it is. The only promise I'm assuming that Kirby's ever made to Beck is he'll have every chance to win the job in a competition, and we see that playing out right now. Now, over the course of the next couple of weeks prior to G-Day, it'll be interesting to see, or it may be interesting to hear, if somehow Beck is making some sort of big move towards not just distancing himself from Gunnar Stockton, which maybe seems to be taking place right now. Gunner's, after all, still really young, but also kind of potentially distancing himself from Brock Vandagriff there as well. We'll see if this happens over the course of the next couple of weeks. But the only promise we would assume that Kirby Smart makes is the promise to come here, get your chance to compete, and get your chance to show what you're all about. Credit to Beck for being patient with that. But you're sort of led to believe that, these are the kinds of players that Kirby Smart recruits, that ultimately the quarterback competition that's playing out at Georgia right now is actually a reflection of how everything sort of operates at UGA, where seemingly the overwhelming majority of players who come into the program, quarterbacks included, kind of know what they're signing up for, that it's going to be hard here, that you're going to be asked to do a lot here. You're going to be asked to compete with a player who's at least as good as you are, and nothing's going to come easy. And if you want to go somewhere easy, then you need to go 8-5, some other program, as opposed to what you do here, which is have a chance to go 15-0 and win another national championship. With all that in mind, I think Kirby Smart, within the last few days, actually had some very interesting, candid remarks about the idea of transfers, whether it be quarterbacks who choose to stick around and stay when so many other quarterbacks choose not to do that, or other places where, you just see the transfer portal becoming the dominant topic with that program. Players leaving, players coming in. And in a place like Georgia, the turnstiles just don't spin quite as fast. That Georgia has done a very good job of holding on to the players that it has in the program. Guys like Carson Beck, but players at other positions as well. And this is where sometimes I think you get some really interesting stuff from Kirby Smart, because Smart was on the podcast with Coach K, the former Duke coach. Didn't even know Coach K had a podcast. Apparently he does. And it's always interesting to hear Kirby talking with another coach, even with a coach from another sport, because I think you get a little bit more relaxed version of Kirby and all of that. Kirby is a coach's coach, so he likes being around other coaches. And candidly with Coach K, Kirby Smart, and I'll put a link to the full YouTube video when I post the show later on today at the world-famous DawgNation.com. But candidly with Coach K, Kirby Smart was talking about his desire to bring in the kind of players who won't be looking to transfer, and the overall kind of tangible measurement that Smart kind of holds himself to in light of all of this. So with Greg McElroy saying, hey, isn't it interesting that Carson Beck hasn't transferred, how about Kirby with Coach K kind of explaining why there are so many Georgia players who are willing to stick it out? This is Kirby with Coach K.
I'm really big on getting the core of your team from high school, developing them the right way. And it really boils down, Coach K, to who you bring in your organization. Because if they come in looking to leave, or they come in expecting to only play as a freshman and have it easy, then we probably recruited the wrong guy. They're not going to keep them there. I really think keeping your players at least 70% retention rate is going to allow us to be different if we can keep 70% of the guys we sign.
So I think that's a very interesting statement from Kirby Smart, that our goal, he says, of the guys we bring in from high school, which he says will be the predominant source of talent on our roster, our goal is to find a way to keep 70% of them around. And if we've got a lot of guys who are kind of expecting to play right away or looking to transfer at the first sign of trouble, Kirby says in that clip you just heard, that means we recruited the wrong guy. So to go back to Greg McElroy's point about Carson Beck, how come he hasn't transferred? How come he stayed patient? How come he waited out when when almost every other quarterback of his talent level, measured by the star rankings and things like that, when they were all bolting, when they're all transferring, going here and going there and looking for, immediate automatic playing time somewhere else, how come Carson Beck was different? Well, Kirby Smart tells Coach K in the clip you just heard is the reason why Beck is different is because everybody on this roster is different. They are selected for their willingness to compete. They are selected for their willingness to stick it out, fight through adversity in order to become a better player on the other side. And by the way, to kind of keep this conversation going in the same sort of chat with Coach K, Kirby Smart talked more about that belief that avoiding the transfer portal, at least in terms of a major source of talent on your roster, that putting most of your eggs in the basket of recruiting high school talent, he actually says it actually makes it easier to recruit high school players when you've kind of made it known that you're not going to push the easy button and go in and bring in 7 or 8 transfers in any given year. Kirby kind of talked about how the other players on the roster kind of appreciate the honesty and the candor that the Georgia coaches can kind of give to them about the small number of transfers they're willing to consider. This is Kirby with Coach K one more time.
What a tremendous statement to your players, that where you can look them in the eye and say, I'm not taking anybody. I got you. I got you. And
I think it helps you in recruiting. The question now is, how many are you going to take? Will you take guys out of the portal at my position? And when elite high school talent asks you that, and you can say, well, we didn't take any, it allows them to say, well, I'm going to have a chance to come here and play and develop. They're not going to just pull people from over top of me. That's been important for them.
At the beginning of that clip, I almost thought we were going to get a little Sonny and Cher from Coach K. I got you. This is going to give me like the I got you, babe. I got you, babe. If you notice that. Look, little Sonny and Cher from Coach K off the top there. But nonetheless, this is an example of sometimes what you get from Kirby Smart. Just like really genuine honesty that Georgia has been slow to want to take transfers. Not unwilling to take them. They did take 3 this year, including 2 at the wide receiver spot. They will take some transfers, but if you go back and look at the team that just won a national championship, that was not a team that was built by any transfers. And that kind of slow, sort of reluctant shopping in the transfer portal has made it easier to go out and make promises that you can keep to high school players. Not promises that eventually you'll be a starter and eventually going to be playing, but promise that you're going to have every chance to compete. We're not going to just go recruit some transfer over top of you and kind of bury on the depth chart. I think that's kind of stuff that matters. So when you look at a guy like Carson Beck, as Greg McElroy did, obviously I think McElroy's right when he says that Beck, if he does truly emerge as the starter, has a chance to be a very good player, has a chance to lead Georgia to a 3rd straight national championship, and then be in a very impressive NFL draft conversation after that. But as far as why Beck hasn't transferred already and what Georgia may have promised him to keep him from doing that, I think you hear from Kirby Smart very candidly that Georgia's thing is it wants as many high school players as it can get. Talented guys who are willing to compete, work hard, and stick it out at a place like UGA. That's the kind of talent that Georgia seeks. And it's players like that, including Beck, who's shown incredible perseverance here thus far, that is why Georgia is back-to-back national champions and why they could win their 3rd straight here in 2023. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We start even earlier than that on Athens Sports Radio. Actually, I'm getting my script messed up. We start earlier than that at DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. That's 9:45 in the morning. We do that, called our First and 15. We are on the radio as well, noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 Rep. By now, some of y'all can say this better than I can. Of course, podcasts across all the various podcast platforms there as well. Just happy to have you choose the program no matter how you choose to access it, podcast, video, radio, whatever else. We're just really glad you're here. And a big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia who make it all possible. Foundation waterproofing issues, that's what they help you with. And we just came across a weekend where there's a good bit of rain. There's a good bit of rain in my house yesterday there as well. For some of you, rain produces anxiety because you know you're going to be seeing signs of sort of wetness and dampness where you don't want it to be, basement, crawl space, garage, things like that. If that's what you find yourself facing, or if that's what you kind of deal with every time it rains, it's time to get to know my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, because listen, they are a solutions-based company, and if you're dealing with that kind of waterproofing issue, problem, you need the house resealed, protected from the water there on the outside, ESOG is the name to know on this. You can give them a call at 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. Also for foundation issues, and you know the signs of that. You go down to the basement, that concrete floor down there, you see that crack, you see the examples of the settling, or in the walls in your house, different places. You kind of see those cracks, and you know, ooh, this may not be very good. And maybe it's not, but it also might be a simple fix there as well, because if it is, Engineered Solutions of Georgia is going to tell you that. Simple fix to fix a simple problem. But if it's a little bit more complicated, all the more reason to have Engineered Solutions of Georgia on the job, because they have an entire team of engineers on staff to help you with your problem. There's nobody else in our market that puts that kind of resource to work for you. That is what Engineered Solutions of Georgia is all about. They're also proud partners of UGA. It is fun to support those who support the Dogs, and we are so appreciative of your support of ESOG there as well, because they've been long-time friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily for quite some time there as well. So give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and your waterproofing issues. I told you before, it's Jake Fromm later on. It's Mike Johnson here coming up in a couple of minutes there as well. Prior to that, though, let's go around the DawgHouse. And we talk quarterbacks off the top. I want to look at a different position group for a minute here, but also on offense. You know, we have said plenty about the injury to running back Kendall Milton and what that means for the Georgia running back situation, with Dajon Edwards already banged up a little bit too, that all of a sudden, at least for spring, Georgia looks a little thin at the running back spot. But games that matter are still many months away, and so I don't know that anyone's too stressed out about this right now. In fact, the absence of Milton, the absence of Edwards, while they're working their way back to full health, is creating an opportunity for other Georgia running backs, and it could be those other Georgia running backs, in this case, Branson Robinson, Roderick Robinson, Branson, a second-year player, Roderick, an incoming true freshman. It sounds like they may be taking the most advantage of their opportunity here right now. As an example that kind of proves this point, let me let you hear Kirby Smart again, this time from his press conference on Saturday after Georgia had a spring scrimmage. Now, you're going to have the rat-a-tat-tat of typewriting on this. I understand that. The keyboard's going in full effect, but you can still hear Kirby as he talks about how they've had to pivot at the running back spot with Dajon banged up and Kendall Milton kind of dealing with an injury too. This is Kirby Smart giving you his evaluation of that position group here right now.
Dajon's been dealing with a hamstring, so he's been in and out. I mean, he's hitting some good miles per hour. I think Dajon's really close and could have pushed it over the edge today to go to give us some more depth at back, but we didn't do that with the hopes that 2 days off, Sunday, Monday, we'll have him ready to go Tuesday. Obviously, Kendall's injury, he's out, but Branson did a good job, man. Branson had, I think we ended up getting around 10 carries for Branson and about 10 carries for Rod, which is a lot for us in the scrimmage. We tend to, the guys that haven't played in games in the fall, we try to get them 10 to 12 a scrimmage. The guys that have played a lot in games, we try to get them 4 to 5 a scrimmage. But those guys did a nice job.
So Kirby Smart says Branson, he did a good job, man. He did a good job. That's the kind of casual compliments that Kirby Smart doesn't throw around lightly. If Smart's saying that coming off a Branson Robinson scrimmage, I'm left to conclude that must be really true. And what we saw at flashes last year of Branson having the look of maybe a future start running back for Georgia, maybe some of that is kind of coming into shape here as it relates to spring practice. The other running back, though, who's also kind of getting his opportunity for the first time is the other Robinson, the incoming freshman, Roderick Robinson. You heard Kirby Smart talking a little bit about him there. And this is one of those guys that Georgia fans, I think, are working as hard as they can to get to know as quickly as possible because of the sudden opportunity for maybe more playing time, certainly heading towards G-Day, but perhaps even making a name for himself that gives him a chance to be a bigger part of the story during this upcoming season, too. Exactly what does Roderick Robinson bring to the table? Well, you heard some of that from Kirby Smart, and you have in the past, but also one of his partners there in the running back position room, including Kendall Milton, who's kind of dealing with a little bit of an injury situation right now, as we've talked to you about. Well, when Kendall met with the reporters the other day, he talked about what he has seen from Roderick Robinson, kind of giving us a little bit more of an idea about exactly what Rod brings to the table in his first season at Georgia. Here's Kendall Milton.
Roderick, he came in at like 240 pounds, something like that. And, walking through the facility, I always tell him, hey, bro, you're going to be a fullback, you keep eating. But, he's going to be a great player. Just seeing him, he has the ability, he can still run with his weight. He's a strong player. He's he can make those cuts. And, same thing like me when I came in as a running back, you just have to be able to, get comfortable learning the schemes and learning the pass pro and learning, the different blitzes and, just learning different stuff that, comes with being a running back in such a high talented offense. So I'm excited, especially him being, from California and everything. I'm excited to, see him come here and leave his mark.
So I think that's interesting from Kendall Milton there, another California running back who obviously put up big numbers to end his high school career, and a guy who's in the midst of kind of transforming his body. We would say that's exactly what Kenny McIntosh did when he also arrived at Georgia there too, eventually becoming, I believe, a better pass-catching weapon in the UGA offense than almost anyone could have ever imagined. Maybe Roderick Robinson has a chance to travel a similar path here. Either way, both Branson Robinson and Roderick Robinson have made for themselves some fans among the sort of UGA fan base here in DawgNation over the course of the spring. Eager to see them on G-Day and excited about the chance that one of these younger running backs, or maybe both these younger running backs, can propel themselves into a conversation for some real playing time this fall, taking advantage of the opportunity that exists at running back because of injuries, trying to make the most of this moment. It sounds like Roderick Robinson and Branson Robinson are both in the midst of trying to do just that. That is Around the DawgHouse here on DawgNation Daily here today. And before we bring on Mike Johnson here and talk more about the situation at Georgia and the rest of the SEC, let me also give you an exciting thing to be aware of for those of you who kind of live in this area, Braves fans, a part of a great new start to the season of the Atlanta Braves, and a great new uniform that's going to be on display for the Atlanta Braves this year. Have you seen the brand new City Connect Braves jersey? I love these. They've got the A, kind of the script A with the right next to it. You're going to be seeing the Braves wearing these each and every week. In fact, you have a chance to get your own brand new design that reflects this, kind of paying homage to Henry Aaron in the 1974 season, and obviously, the great, I sort of still think of as the record-setting, home run total, no matter what, Barry Bonds and, other guys did. I sort of think of 755 as the real home run record, and I sort of think of Hank Aaron kind of wearing that 1974 uniform, and obviously this Brave City Connect jersey is it's kind of patterned after all of that with kind of a new kind of modern flair. I can tell you my son has already seen these, and he wants one of these so bad. So you're going to be seeing the Braves wearing these, and you have a chance to kind of purchase your own City Connect Braves jersey there as well. If you go to braves.com/City Connect, you can find out more about this. Braves.com/City Connect. The Braves are going to wear these the first time coming up on April 8th, and then you can get your own to kind of wear that there too as the Braves kind of go through a great season. Already a great start. Take 2 or 3 from Washington. You win last night in St. Louis. Coming back at it tonight. So a lot going on with the Atlanta Braves right now, including a brand new uniform here for 2023. The City Connect jersey, kind of paying homage to Henry Aaron. Got the cool looking the A right there on the front of it. So go to braves.com/City Connect to find out a lot more on that. All right. Before we're done on today's show, it's former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. He's going to be here today. We'll talk to him about the competition taking place to be the guy that follows in the footsteps of Stetson Bennett here at Georgia. We'll do all of that with Jake here before we're done. But for now, a guy that's been a good friend of our show for a long time and a guy now a part of a brand new radio show that is a ton of fun there as well. Let's get all of that with Mike Johnson here right now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Yeah, Mike was kind of one of our DawgNation insiders for a long time, and it's great to have him back on the program here now, and great to be hearing him on the radio in Atlanta each and every morning now. Mike, how you enjoying waking up in the morning? You doing okay with that? That's a little earlier wake-up call than the typical football player probably would have gotten when you were playing with the Atlanta Falcons. What's the early wake-up call been like?
Dude, first of all, good to talk to you, man. Lots of coffee, lots of caffeine, and a scheduled nap time after our radio show is over. So my alarm's about 3:45 a.m. right now, and good thing is I'm done with work by about 9 a.m. So I get a little mid-afternoon nap.
Well,
that's always good.
I understand that. I know I'm probably interrupting that right now, but nonetheless, we're glad to have you as part of the show today. And I, look back on all those years in which you and I were talking college football, and I've always enjoyed our conversations. Obviously, a lot of our audience is aware of the fact that you won a national championship. You were an All-American there at Alabama. And when you and I were first having some of these college football conversations together, that was early days for Kirby Smart, trying to build what Alabama had been. And, now you've got Georgia as kind of a back-to-back national champion. From your vantage point, what's it been like seeing Georgia, figure out how to put all this together and figure out how to have the success they've enjoyed here and really kind of put themselves, kind of at the forefront of the college football conversation. What has it been like for you watching this take place for a guy in Kirby Smart that, at one point in time in your football career you knew very well?
Yeah, I remember talking to you about Kirby Smart when he was hired, and I've had other coaches that I played under that have gone to different places and didn't seem to fit. I mean, you and I used to have conversations about Jim McElroy at Florida. I mean, there's a guy from Eastern Washington that's trying to take over in Gainesville and recruit South Florida.
Yeah.
Jeremy Pruitt obviously landing at Tennessee. That's a Bama guy landing at the University of Tennessee, and doesn't seem to quite fit. But I remember talking to you about Kirby Smart when he took over at the helm in Athens, and just how excited I was for him and the opportunity, because I think everybody in the college football world knew that University of Georgia was just a sleeping giant. It's just a dynasty waiting to happen. And I've had a number of friends that have gone through that program, and they've had success here and there before Kirby Smart, but nothing to the height that they've gotten recently. So it's been insane. Being around the city of Atlanta for close to 13 years now, and seeing the growth out of that program, and seeing Kirby just become the elite head coach in college football. I mean, he's really putting himself up there on the Mount Rushmore of coaches in college football, and I just think the sky's the limit. I mean, I remember sitting on our show a few years back and just saying, hey, buckle up, Georgia fans, because you're getting ready to start a dynasty. And I don't think he's disappointed at all, man. Just an incredible job that he's done recruiting and developing those players down in Athens. It's been fun to watch.
You were already in the NFL when Alabama won back-to-back titles in 2011 and 2012. How much time did you get a chance to spend around that program in 2013 when they were kind of in the same spot that Georgia is now, going for that third straight national championship? And, how difficult do you think it is for a team to kind of maintain its edge after it's had, that much success? Do you have very many memories of going back and visiting Tuscaloosa in 2013 when, they were on top of the college football world and really at that time kind of expected to come back and win it again? How much time around Tuscaloosa did you get during that period?
I got a pretty good bit, and I remember I talked to more of the coaches at that point. Scott Cochran, who's obviously with the Georgia program now, and some of the other coaches I talked to more. Listen, trying to find that fire, that ability to reach down and kind of hit that extra gear with the program after so much success, it's tough. And look, I'll tell you, we won a national championship my senior year, just one at Alabama, and I always make the comment that I'm glad that I graduated, because I can't imagine having to reach back down and do that again. And I think, 2010 Alabama was a huge disappointment in a lot of people's eyes, because I think a lot of the players felt that way. They lost to South Carolina, they lost to LSU, they lost to Cam Newton and Auburn. And they're able to kind of use that 2010 season to propel them to 2011 and 2012. I cannot imagine the hunger that it takes to try to do that back-to-back, much less 3 times in a row. But after you've shown the ability to do it twice in a row, I don't have any reason why the leadership and really the coaching staff down there won't be able to do it again. I just think the talent level between Georgia and many of these other programs can kind of cover the fact that maybe there's a little bit of a lull. I don't know that there will be, but look, it's hard. Mentally, it's hard. It's such a grind to be in a program like Kirby Smart's program and know that you have to come to work and give 12 out of 10 energy day in and day out. I mean, year round, by the way, all the way from January to January. And so I think that's mentally tough. It's a huge mental hurdle. But I know that Kirby Smart seems to be in the right headspace to kind of put his head back down in the grindstone and go back to work. And I think that's what separates him from other coaches.
I want to ask about some of these other SEC teams in a minute, but let me just kind of follow up one thing on that, which is the one thing I've told our audience is if you go back and look at Alabama in 2013, when they were in a position of trying to go for a third straight national championship, they ultimately were undone by a team that almost no one could have predicted at the beginning of the season. Auburn had, Gus Malzahn as a first-year coach. This is basically a guy that a couple of years prior to that had been coaching in high school. You had Nick Marshall at quarterback. That's essentially a converted defensive back. And yet you have this sort of miracle run for Auburn that year, kick six game, of course. But even beyond that, Auburn was a very unexpected team in 2013. And ultimately, they're the ones that won the SEC and almost won the national championship. And so, Mike, what I've told our audience is, hey, right now on paper, remember, Georgia is kind of the overwhelming favorite. Again, they're about, 2.5 to 1 or so to win the national championship right now, based on some of the odds that are out there. But you have to be on guard for any kind of surprise to take place, because college football is a sport that historically is not very easy to predict. And just when you think you know exactly what's going to happen, this sport has a way of surprising you, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I remember that game with Nick Marshall and company. And, Lord, you want to talk about going way back. I think we played Gus Malzahn his first year getting out of high school when he was the offense coordinator at Arkansas with Mitch Mustain,
right.
Back in, I think it was 07 or 06. So, yeah, I think one of the things, and where Alabama back in 2013 and Georgia is similar now, is really when you look at both these programs and both these coaching styles, they're so well coached and they're so regimented and they're so rule driven about what they're doing on the football field. And obviously that leads to a ton of success whenever you know your rules and you know your assignment, you know what mistakes you cannot make. But sometimes when you go against a program like a Nick Marshall and Gus Malzahn at Auburn back then, a team that can freestyle a little bit more and kind of has more playmakers that kind of go outside the box and do things differently, that's kind of what you get every now and then. And I think what Georgia is figuring out and what they've been so good at, keeping from happening is when when other teams from around the SEC go out and make hires based on what Georgia's doing. They're going, hey, how can we beat Georgia? Yeah. Let's go hire this guy. Let's run this offense. Let's bring in this coordinator, because that is the kind of guy that can go beat a Georgia football team. So, I think that's what you're seeing right now. When you're so good and so rule driven and so well coached, sometimes the teams that will give you the most fits are the ones that think outside the box and do things a little bit differently. So I'm sure that Kirby Smart, obviously, very well aware of that with the rings he has on the shelf. And he'll be, trying to coach up against that in the future.
All right, before we hear more about the radio show, I want to go through a couple of the other SEC teams here really quick and get your thoughts on this. The situation in Alabama right now, I'm having a hard time figuring this out. I'm not being funny or anything like that. Obviously, this is a team that expects to compete for the national championship this year, and yet, Mike, the thing that has kind of driven Alabama the last few years has been great quarterback play. Going on now a good number of years, Alabama's had a real top-flight quarterback. I can't quite tell what's going on with this competition right now between Jalen Milroe, who we did see last year, and Ty Simpson, who we haven't seen as much of, but at one point in time was a big-time prospect. It seems like at one point I thought a lot of Alabama fans assumed that Simpson was going to overtake Milroe, but thus far this spring it feels like it's been a little quiet on the Simpson front. And maybe no news is good news and he ends up being a great player, but it seems like the chatter about the next Alabama starting quarterback is kind of quiet right now. Do you have a better sense of what's going on there?
Yeah, I wish I did, to be honest with you. A lot of people ask me this question, and I don't have any insight right now. And I think really the year I kind of go back to, and I've always referred back to, is 2016, when really you had a quarterback battle at Alabama, and the starter ended up being Blake Barnett, I think against USC that year. And then you go into the second half of that game, that opener, and into week 2, and it's Jalen Hurts. And I think that really – I think things are going to shake out much further down the road than they are right now. And I think that Nick Saban usually does a good job, as Kirby Smart has done as well in some of his quarterback battles, of letting things kind of play out and saying, hey, look, we're the kind of place that I don't need elite quarterback play all the time. I need you not to make huge mistakes. Let's go back to the offensive line. Let's go back to the running game. Let's go play into our defense's hands. And obviously that's been the blueprint for Kirby Smart for a long time, and that's always been Nick Saban's blueprint. So I think that any time that you have a situation where you're in spring and one guy's kind of, got some reps under his belt and the other guy's got the new flashy arm and a little bit of swag about him, I think Nick Saban just does a good job of kind of tamping down the expectations and saying, hey, let's just wait a minute. Let's get into week 1, week 2, and make sure things are a little bit different.
Do you think that Tennessee can take the next step playing as little defense as they do?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I said, do you think Tennessee can take the next step as a program playing as little defense as they seem to play?
Well, I think when you look at Tennessee, Brandon, I think it's just all about recruiting. And they play very little defense because they have not been able to get the caliber of stars that Georgia and Alabama and some of these other teams have defensively. They don't have the size and the speed that you need in the front seven to really make a run. And I think that showed big time when they played some of the bigger schools last year. So can Heupel recruit at Tennessee? That's what's going to answer that question for me. Obviously, offensively, he can draw X's and O's up with the best of them. But can he get those guys in the front seven that are just difference makers? I think there's a lot of questions still to be answered.
All right, we'll let you go here. Remind folks, though, every morning, 92.9 The Game. Excited to have you back on the radio talking sports again. What made you want to kind of get back involved? What is it about this show that's fun for you? And obviously, also, how can folks going to tune in and hear it each and every day?
Yeah, listen, we're not only a sports show, but we're a lifestyle show. Myself, Bo Morgan, Tiffany Blackman. We're on from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. in Atlanta every day on 92.9. And look, man, I love sports. I love talking to all the sports. You know that. And it was just the perfect opportunity at the perfect time to try to get back into it. And we're really enjoying it, man. We try to have a lot of fun. We hope the listeners are having a lot of fun. And we appreciate anybody that's tuning in.
Well, listen, I'm happy to have you back on the radio again. I love hearing you, and I love talking SEC football with you there as well, too. Hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again very soon, Mike. Thanks so much for your time.
All right, thanks. Good, man. Good to catch up with you.
You too, Mike.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, so I'll kind of reiterate here for a moment that a lot of you kind of remember this. Some of you don't. We obviously have, getting new listeners all the time. But years ago, you want to go back to like 2016, 2017 into 2018 is when we were doing this. So 16, 17, 18, I guess the years would have been. Mike and I did a show together called SEC Country Live. And love working with Mike. Mike's just a great guy to work with. I think you see there. He's got a really, thoughtful perspective on the SEC. He was always a really valuable guy to have for our show back then because he had known Kirby Smart and he had known Scott Cochran very well. And he'd kind of seen what they had done for Alabama. He was on the opposite side of the ball, but he'd seen that. And so, we kind of used Mike as a very big resource at the time in which Kirby Smart was kind of building up the program and saying, okay, so this is the place that Kirby's at right now. And, Mike could kind of talk about kind of taking that next step as a program. And at times I remember, even though he was an Alabama guy, I remember him kind of coming on the show and saying some very valuable things about, what was going on there at UGA. And obviously now Georgia's gone on to great success. And now we got Mike back on the show again, talking about some stuff right there. Just kind of fun how it all kind of comes back together there. So great to have Mike as a part of the show here today. And you can check him out each and every morning on the radio there, 92.9 The Game. We'll get Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback, coming up here in a couple of minutes there as well. Before that, though, we're going to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And speaking of Royal Caribbean, we are getting excited about being on board Independence of the Seas. We had a Golden Shoe winner yesterday who was also getting ready to be on Independence of the Seas. He's going to be on there in June, so he's not going to be on the DawgNation cruise coming up. But he told us, hey, and this was on Twitter yesterday, he used Jessica Slater as his travel agent to help get him booked up on all that. He said that she took really good care of him. I'm always happy to hear that. And she can take really good care of you, too. She's a travel agent specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to book your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I think it's really interesting that Royal Caribbean really believes that a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation is made even better when you use a great travel agent. I think the reason why is because there's so many variables to consider when you take a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. It's what port do you want to go out of? Do you want to go out of Port Canaveral? That's kind of the closest to where I am right now. But you can also go to Fort Lauderdale or Miami or whatever might be convenient to you depending on where you might be. Do you want a short sailing, 3-night over the course of a weekend, or a 4-night sailing, or one of the big 7-night sailings on one of those Oasis-class ships? And which ports do you want to visit? All the kind of questions that you kind of want to get answered. A great travel agent can help you get those answers. Jessica's done a great job getting us ready for the DawgNation cruise. And we are so excited about how great all of that's going to be. So if you want to have your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation to get excited about, you can give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She can even tell you more about Icon of the Seas, the brand new ship debuting January of 2024, setting a new standard for a cruise vacation. Boy, a lot of great stuff going on with the Royal Caribbean. We love telling you those stories each and every day here as we're cruising around the SEC. Now, speaking of that, let's kind of dive into all of this right now and go cruise around the SEC here just a bit. We talked a moment ago with Mike Johnson about Auburn, kind of the surprise team in 2013. I don't think expectations are nearly high for that to happen again here in 2023. But it is, once again, a first-year coach at Auburn, and Hugh Freeze is making a little bit of headlines for his opinion about something that I think would actually be a welcome change for college football, but I don't believe this is likely going to happen. So what Hugh Freeze is talking about is his desire to see SEC teams play another opponent for their spring games. I'll read you a couple of quotes here from Freeze on this. He says that everybody would get out of it exactly what they want. And if everybody's doing that, let Alabama play Troy, we'll play UAB, or vice versa, meaning play one of those in-state, like Group of 5 or FCS level schools. He says, I don't care, play Alabama State. He says, people will come see that. You're decreasing your injury probabilities by 50%. So what he's saying is if you got your team playing itself in a spring game, that means every time, one of these things collide, you've got Auburn player versus Auburn player. If you're playing somebody else, you're only 50% less, likely to get injured because you've got, while your offense on the field, your defense is resting, which I think is kind of an interesting idea. Freeze also says, I just think that would be great for the sport. I think it'd be awesome. NFL gets to scrimmage against each other, which is true. They have preseason games, but you also have the organized practices where, one team will go visit another and they'll practice together from time to time. So this isn't foreign to the NFL. He says, I think it'd be a great. His high schools get to scrimmage against each other. That's also true there as well. He says, for the life of me, I don't understand why we haven't gotten to that point where we can pull that off. Well, I'm guessing a lot of this probably comes down to money because during the season, an FCS team is visiting Auburn and they're taking home about $1.5 million check for doing so. My guess is that SEC schools would not be nearly as willing to pay for that when it comes to a spring game. That they're just not going to be getting the same kind of crowd. You're certainly not getting the same kind of television interest. Georgia's the only spring game thus far that's going to be on TV here this year. The rest of them are all streaming internet. So you don't have the TV rights dollars flowing in for this on a spring game basis, which is probably why you don't hear more serious conversation about this taking place. But if we're kind of moving into a world in the future where you're looking at fewer games to be played against FCS and Group of 5 level teams, and this might be one of the ways in which you kind of bring that back as part of the sport. Because fast forward into the future on the Georgia schedule, in a few years, as it currently stands, Georgia's got non-conference games scheduled with 3 different Power 5 opponents. That means you've essentially eliminated FCS Group of 5 level games. And for the FCS and kind of the low-level Group of 5 teams, this is how they fund their program for the entire year. So if those games really are going away, and I think in the future, the appetite to see, in the fall, SEC-level program like Georgia playing McNeese State or something like that, I think the appetite for that just about gone. So if those programs are going to survive, they're going to have to generate some revenue somehow, and this may be about as good a way to do it as any. I still think it's a little bit of a pipe dream. My guess is this is a long way from ever happening if it ever does. But it's kind of interesting to see a guy like Hugh Freeze, who's the coach at Auburn. He has a little bit of a platform to speak on here. It's kind of interesting to hear him speaking up so openly about this. Now, the other funny thing on the subject is that Alabama would hate this. Auburn says, hey, we'll play UAB, we'll play Troy. I mean, Alabama has made a big deal in its program history about not playing schools like UAB. Alabama is not about helping the in-state schools. They're just not. So this, while it may be kind of a wild hair idea that Hugh Freeze sort of likes, it also has the convenient byproduct here of also kind of needling Alabama too, because even pre-Nick Saban, Alabama has not been in the habit of helping out its in-state schools. There's a lot been written over the years about the kind of the boardroom rivalry that exists between UAB and Alabama, dating back to the time of Bear Bryant. So the thought of Alabama looking to help one of these in-state schools with the spring game, I don't think that's going to be coming anytime soon, but it is interesting to hear Hugh Freeze say he wouldn't mind doing it. I'll also mention this. Interesting news coming out of Florida where there's a quarterback, 2025, Austin Simmons. He's a 4-star, kind of ranked in the top 100 in the country. He is getting ready to make his commitment announcement. And this is interesting for a couple of reasons. He comes from a part of Florida that's known as the Muck. I was not familiar with this as a kind of a phrase, but it's called the Muck. So he's from Pahokee, Florida. I guess that area of the state's called the Muck. And Austin Simmons is a running quarterback, so his nickname is Muck Vic, which I think is really funny. So Muck Vic, or his given name, Austin Simmons, is getting ready to make his commitment announcement, and a lot of folks think he's going to commit to Florida. But what's also interesting here is if you look at Gators fans on message boards and things like that, they are the belief that Austin Simmons, otherwise known as Muck Vic, is going to also reclassify. There's a chance, I don't know if this is true or not, but Gators fans seem to be of the belief that Simmons may reclassify 2 classes early and potentially join the class of 2023. So if you go to some of these Florida social media chats or message boards, things like that, there's some Florida fans who think that Simmons may be starting a quarterback for them before the end of the season. I don't know if there's any tangible reporting out there that Simmons is really thinking about reclassifying, but the fact that Florida fans are talking about this so much gives you an idea of a couple of things. A, they are more than ready to turn the page on the Jaden Rashada debacle from the class of 2023, but also they are not excited about the future of Graham Mertz or Jack Miller or any of the other Florida quarterbacks if they are this hopeful that a 2025 quarterback might reclassify 2 classes ahead to join their current team in time for the 2023 season. A little bit of a mess coming out of Gainesville there on that. Florida fans desperate for whatever good news they can get. So they'll be watching here this week to see if Austin Simmons does pull the trigger on a Florida commit. Seems like a lot of folks are saying he's going to. By the way, speaking of quarterbacks, how about a 5-star of the class of 2024? Jaden Davis, as expected, has committed to Michigan. Now, a couple of things are interesting here. Obviously, Georgia has put all of its eggs in the Dylan Raiola basket. We know that for a fact now. You saw you see Jaden Davis going to Michigan. You see Jake Merklier made his commit here recently. Go back to when Julian Sayin committed to Alabama. Georgia has been content to let all those quarterbacks do what they're going to do. Georgia has been solely focused on Raiola. So pretty clearly, Georgia thinks there's one quarterback in this class that's far better than any other, and Georgia also a little bit more content to kind of focus its efforts on Raiola, not really hedging itself whatsoever. Now, they do have a commitment, obviously, from Ryan Puglisi, but when it comes to kind of like that front-end quarterback battle here, Georgia pretty squarely on Raiola right now, which is obviously a really interesting thing a year after they didn't quite work out with Arch Manning, but Georgia not dissuade to kind of go back down the same path with a guy like Raiola here right now. Official visit expected to come at the beginning of June, and then we'll see what happens after that. But Georgia content to let another elite 2024 quarterback make his decision. Now, the other thing you got to point out here is that Michigan's actually recruiting pretty well right now. We talked about the other day with Jeff Sintel about going into like Cincinnati and getting a running back commit and getting Jaden Davis here right now. That for all the chatter about Jim Harbaugh, will he leave? Will he go to the NFL? He's interviewed with NFL jobs now 2 years in a row. Michigan kind of 2 consecutive years in the college football playoff is suddenly kind of recruiting like that a bit. Jaden Davis, the kind of quarterback you can build a class around here. So pretty interesting recruiting success there as it relates to Jim Harbaugh and Michigan. Getting Davis is a pretty big deal. And this ongoing comparison between Michigan and Ohio State, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind, that there's more recruiting momentum seemingly with Michigan at the moment than there is with Ohio State. Something to kind of keep in mind there. And then finally, we'll mention this. Last night, the NCAA men's basketball tournament came to an end. And UConn, who I don't know that I would have expected this prior to the tournament beginning, they end up going on one of the most dominant runs anybody's gone through in, I guess, recent tournament history, right? I mean, they got a brief challenge from San Diego State last night. But other than that, they completely ran through the entire tournament, winning, 5th championship in program history. And I think suddenly you talk about a UConn team that all of a sudden you have to consider right up there with the blue bloods of the sport. This has now become a very, very successful, historic basketball program after Danny Hurley led the Huskies to a national championship last night. So I think it was a fun NCAA tournament. I don't follow college basketball quite as closely as I used to, but when I was tuned into these games over the course of the month of March, they were all pretty good, pretty enjoyable, and UConn goes on a historic run here to win a 5th championship, dominating every team they played for the most part, really, rarely challenged at all in this tournament. So impressive there. And by the way, last night was also the conclusion of the career of Jim Nantz calling these games. A very touching video I saw last night. They played I always like the One Shining Moment, that song they play on CBS at the end of the broadcast where you're kind of showing the highlights, you get the song. Is it Peebo Bryson who sings that? No, that's not Peebo Bryson. Anyway, you've got the One Shining Moment. You've got that video, and there was video last night of Nantz in Houston, which is where obviously he went to college. Went to college in Houston. He's there in Houston, watching that video from down the floor. Basically, that was his kind of moment of saying goodbye to a tournament that he's called for a long time. He's not going anywhere at CBS. Still going to call the Masters. He'll do that this weekend. Obviously staying involved in the NFL there as well, just saying goodbye to his college basketball coverage. So Jim Nantz got a chance to do that last night, and that was really kind of a touching end to a great career there. So that is good there on that. Will make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, we are efforting to catch up with Jake Fromm here. We'll get him coming up in just a moment. Jake's always a fun guy to have on the show. When we bring Jake on, one of the things that we're going to do is kind of get back into some of what we talked about off the top of today's program, which is when you're a quarterback making a decision to come to a place like Georgia, or if you're Carson Beck making a decision to stay at Georgia. What's that conversation like, that communication like between you and coaches as you make that choice? And like the one thing that we have tried to point out a lot here is is that the knee-jerk reaction that the moment that something doesn't go well for me, I'm better off bolting, I'm better off transferring. The knee-jerk reaction on something like that oftentimes proves to be incorrect, and sometimes that decision to be a little more patient actually ends up being the better decision. The example we've given a couple times here is, look at what's happening at Ole Miss right now. Ole Miss had a transfer at quarterback a year ago, Jackson Dart, who came over from USC. And he came with a lot of fanfare. This is back when Lane Kiffin was sort of first establishing himself as sort of the master of the transfer portal, the guy that probably was manipulating the transfer portal better than almost anybody else. You bring in Jackson Dart from USC. There's always a little bit of extra emphasis that a quarterback from USC is going to have. We experienced that here at Georgia when JT Daniels arrived. And Dart did become the Ole Miss starter this past year. But I would say that the overall level of play for Ole Miss at quarterback was kind of only okay. That he actually had a battle with Luke Altmaier to even win the job. And once he won it, the level of play was just sort of kind of okay. It was okay, but it was not great. And so now you fast forward to 2023, and Jackson Dart, who was once the herald of transfer, well, now he finds himself in a quarterback competition with two other pretty high-profile transfers. You got a young quarterback in Walker Howard from LSU, but you've also got a guy, Spencer Sanders from Oklahoma State, who has played a lot, and for the most part, for the Cowboys out there, he's played pretty well. So all of a sudden now at Ole Miss, and by the way, Ole Miss is on the Georgia schedule, all of a sudden now you've got three quarterbacks, all of them in their own right, relatively high-profile transfers, and two of them are not going to play. And I do think in the future we are going to see more examples of the high-profile transfer quarterback who ends up not winning that starting job at the place that he goes, because in some respects, you've got more programs looking to take multiple transfer quarterbacks you've ever had in the past. And so I think that Carson Beck has been wise to allow himself to be patient at Georgia, allow this opportunity to come to him. And you look at other proofs of concept here. An example that I've given you in the past, a guy like Mac Jones. When Mac Jones signed with Alabama in the class of 2017, he wasn't even the most famous quarterback in that signing class for Alabama. That's the same year that Tua Tagovailoa came into the program. So at one point in time, you had Jalen Hurts there, you had Tua Tagovailoa there, and Mac Jones was kind of the afterthought. And when it's all said and done, what Jones did in 2020, albeit in a pandemic year, but nonetheless, what Jones did in 2020 ended up being about as prolific as any quarterback has been in the SEC, maybe with the exception of Joe Burrow. And that's what happens when, in the case of Mac Jones, when he chose to be patient. He's buried in the depth chart. A lot of folks thought his time there at Alabama would never come. And yet when it's all said and done, he was a national champion. He was a first-round pick. And his patience at Alabama was rewarded. Now, I know it sounds self-serving to say that about this situation here at UGA, but we could be in the midst of seeing this. That Carson Beck, who probably after not getting his chance in 2021, kind of passed over for Stetson Bennett for that game against UAB. Bennett goes on to have the historic career after that. A lot of people would have totally forgiven Beck if he grew impatient. If he said, hey, my best chance to play is somewhere else because I've gotten passed over by Stetson Bennett now here a couple of years. So let me go somewhere else. For whatever reason, that's not what Carson Beck has done. For whatever reason, Carson Beck has chose to be patient. He's chose to stick it out. He's chose to stay around and compete. And it could be, much like a guy like Mac Jones in the past, that patience is eventually going to be rewarded. I'll also tell you this, and by the way, if you're wondering, we tried to catch up with Jake Fromm. We may have a little bit of a phone issue in connecting with Jake. If that be the case, we'll try to bring him to you there at some point in time in the future. We'll give him a couple more minutes, and if we have to talk to Jake later on, we'll just do that. But I'm going to kind of tap dance here for a moment just to see if something changes. Something else that's kind of interesting about Jake Fromm right now, not Jake Fromm, I should say Carson Beck right now is that Beck is actually, I believe, expected to speak to reporters here this week. Now, a lot of times you don't really care about media stuff as it involves, Georgia football and things like that. But what's interesting about this is that oftentimes, Kirby Smart's been kind of reluctant to put quarterbacks who haven't been kind of officially named the starter or not really officially being treated as the starting quarterback. At times, Kirby's been pretty reluctant to put those guys in front of the media. But in the case of Beck, him getting his moment here right now might be a little bit of a signal that, hey, thus far during the spring, Carson, even though he's in a competition with Brock Vandagriff, is doing what Georgia has wanted him to do, doing what Mike Bobo and Kirby Smart have wanted him to do. And in the midst of this competition ongoing with Brock Vandagriff, Beck may be taking the necessary steps to eventually being named as the starting quarterback. So that may be what we're in the midst of seeing here right now. As we told you on yesterday's show, the fun part about this is when it comes to demeanor and decision-making and your overall command control of the offense, things that Kirby Smart says he wants to see from his quarterbacks, we'll get a chance to see that with our own eyes on G-Day. We'll get a chance to see what all of that is all about. So we may miss Jake here today, so let me just do this. Let me remind you that our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm each and every day, each and every week, is brought to you by our friends at Kroger. Now listen, getting ready for Easter coming up. Obviously, that's this upcoming Sunday, and for a lot of you, that means a great family meal that you want to be planned for and ready to go for. So as you're getting ready to do all of that, Kroger's got some easy Easter bundles for you from Home Chef. You can mix and match meals, including ham, quiche, turkey, plus all the great sides you want there as well, all starting at just $40. So it's a great way for you to get a great meal for this upcoming Easter. An easy Easter bundle from our friends at Kroger. All you got to do is go talk to one of those associates right there in your local Kroger, and they'll tell you all about that, how you can get ready for a great meal this upcoming Easter, this upcoming Sunday right there from Kroger. So we'll hope to catch up with Jake Fromm here again very soon. But for now, let's go ahead and wrap up today's show. All right, so Golden Shoe time to give out. We talked about the Atlanta Braves a little earlier, debuting their City Connect jerseys here very soon. Speaking of jerseys, also some great news from the Atlanta Braves here this week there as well, and that'll be the subject of our Golden Shoe. Not every Dog fan's a Braves fan, but enough of you are. This is worth mentioning here. The Atlanta Braves announcing yesterday they are going to retire the number 25, made famous by Andrew Jones, who played 10 Gold Glove seasons for Atlanta, All-Star. I think, came very close to winning an MVP one year there as well. A guy that I think should get more Baseball Hall of Fame consideration than he's gotten, but certainly getting the local love that he is now due, getting that number 25 retired. Long stretch of very distinguished numbers retired by the Atlanta Braves. Add Andrew Jones to the list. I think that's great news. We'll give the Braves a Golden Shoe for that. How about the lousy, stinking Gators begging for 2025 quarterbacks and everything else? Not a very distinguished time to be a Florida fan, but nonetheless, 207 days from right now, Georgia will be back in Jacksonville, beating up on them again. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We'll see you tomorrow on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They are the ones that will show up for you, do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. So sounds like Jake must have been previously engaged here, so we'll try to catch up with him sometime soon. And of course, appreciate Kaylee Manziel doing great work sitting in the producer's chair for us all week here today there as well. We're going to take some comments. We're not going to go crazy long on the comment front here today. We're just going to got a bunch of stuff going on, but we'll certainly take some of those here right now. I will start on YouTube, and then we'll kind of go from there. All right, over here on the YouTube side of things, let's see what folks are saying. Thomas Tyson checking in. Jack Marino checking in there as well. UGA boy for life, Brunetti, touting Gunnar Stockton. Listen, I don't think there's any doubt that I think that Gunnar Stockton has a very bright future. Georgia, I think it's also important to keep in mind that he is the youngest of these quarterbacks. So maybe the overall level of expectation for him right now, a little less than some of the others, just on the simple basis of his age. Let's see what else. Foster, Thomas, some of those guys talking about some picks that Carson may have thrown. So I'm going to be really careful to make too big of a deal about much of this. And I'll tell you why. As I told you yesterday, the real main thing that I want to see from quarterbacks, try to make the positive evaluation as opposed to the negative evaluation. Hey, what kind of big plays are you capable of making? What kind of big plays do you make? As opposed to what kind of mistakes do you avoid? Trying to tiptoe through life avoiding mistakes is not really a very good strategy for life. I'm not really quite so sure that's a great strategy for playing quarterback either. So I told you yesterday, I think the avoidance of interceptions sometimes is overrated. I think what you really want from a quarterback is that moxie, that willingness to make plays. So I'm not going to make a huge deal about the fact that reportedly Beck threw some interceptions during the scrimmage on Saturday. And the other thing is, I try not to make too big of a deal about something I didn't see with my own eyes. So if we're told, not that I distrust any of the sources that are whispering about this, whispering about that, I don't have any reason to distrust those sources or the people reporting those sources. I don't have any reason to distrust that, but I'm just going to choose not to make a huge deal about something I didn't see firsthand. On G-Day, we'll get a chance to see it, and we'll see, what Kirby Smart says in terms of what we see with our own eyes on G-Day how reflective that was of the overall spring performance. But I'm going to make a much bigger deal about something I'm able to see as opposed to something I just don't get a chance to see. Nature Gator checking back in. We hadn't seen Nature Gator in here in a while. He says Austin Simmons, that's Muck Vick, is soon going to be 17 years old. He will have enough academic credits as a high school sophomore to graduate in June. He can choose to become a member of the Florida 23 class if he chooses. Yeah, it sounds like that option might be available to him. So, Florida fans hoping he will do that because they're apparently not very excited about Graham Mertz. So good to have Nature Gator back in the comment section. We've missed him. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark on the subject of A.D. Mitchell out there at Texas. Yeah, there was interesting. We may talk about this tomorrow. Dennis Dodd had an interesting column with some quotes from Steve Sarkisian about how he's managing that quarterback battle. And somebody told me that the other day, like, I'm glad Arch Manning didn't come to Georgia. Too much hysteria. Certainly there is going to be a lot of hysteria around that Texas quarterback competition. Seems like there already is. And it's one of those things that if you're not careful could become a distraction from the fact that what Texas really needs is not to choose between Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. What Texas really needs to do is identify a quarterback that actually help them win a few more games they won this past year. And so I think for a program like Texas that just needs to take advantage of its last year in the Big 12, as Jim Ross would say, business is about to pick up in a mighty way once they get to the SEC in 2024. This is your last easy season. And so having a quarterback, whether it be Quinn or Arch, more important to win some games here in 2023 than it is to kind of, further the, the Arch Manning hype or anything like that. DMart42 says Carson wasn't ready when he was told he was the starter against UAB and struggles. I'm sure Kirby's happy testing his resilience in April instead of September. Yeah, maybe that's the case. And, there were obviously, a lot of leaks, prior to that game against UAB in 2021 that Carson was going to be the starter. I think you got to be really careful with a lot of stuff like that because, once again, you got kind of a game of telephone that gets played. And, oftentimes the prevailing rumors end up not being true. Jonathan Aaron, I did see this there as well. The quarterback who was at Clemson prior to Trevor Lawrence, he was the starting quarterback for the 2017 season. What was his name? But I did see, we have who's our one Clemson guy that's always in the comment section? Maybe he'll tell us. I did see where he tried out for the NFL for the WWE, I should say. I did see that. I'm blanking on his name, but I did see where he tried out for WWE. I did see that. Let's see what else. Jack Marino says if these kids are able to graduate their sophomore year in high school, then they're just giving away diplomas. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, it sounds like the kid's a pretty good student. I did read that. Some also back in my day, I thought like 4.0 was like the highest GPA you could have. I guess his GPA is like 5.3 or something like that, which I was not a very good student anyway. So a lot of that's kind of meaningless to me. But I think that what you have now is a lot of these guys, kids in high school, have a lot of discretion over the courses they take. It's almost, and it functions, I guess, a little bit more like a college situation does. That's not how it was when I was in high school back in the dark ages. But it sounds like he could graduate. But, this idea that, a guy who's about to be 17, would somehow be eligible for Florida this year, I just think that's a pipe dream. The idea that would be a good thing for the player, a good thing for, most of the time when a program takes a reclassified player, they are taking him because that's their best chance of getting him. That, hey, he may be a little young, but we have a chance to get this player right now if he reclassifies, so that's why they do it. So, Florida fans, if, he were to commit and then reclassify, I don't think you want to be the kind of program that would view that as a player who could play for you this year. I don't think you'd want to be that. All right, let me go to Facebook for a minute here. All right, on Facebook. Let's see what's going on here. On the Facebook side here for a moment. Rick Alicorn, or I should say Alarcon, excuse me, Rick. I always pronounce your name wrong, and I don't mean to. Is Micah Morris in the mix for some playing time along the offensive line? That is one of those guys I do feel like we need to hear a little bit more about. He says, dude was a beast there for Camden. I thought he'd be in the mix this season. Any word? Yeah, to me, I think it's a little bit quiet on the Morris front here at the moment. Not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't know that we have a very detailed update on Morris as of late. Good question. Let's see what else. Craig Wasick checking in to say, I was at the Braves game in D.C. this weekend, and it felt like a Georgia away game with all the Bulldog gear on. That's really cool. That's neat. It's always amazing to me how many Braves fans you see on the road. That's always really fun. And I guess for a lot of, Braves fans / Georgia fans, that trip up to Washington, pretty easy trip to make. It's a very short flight. You can drive it in probably 10 and a half hours. So Washington, not a very tough place to get to. Sounds like a lot of Georgians headed up there, which is great. Denise White-Loper says it's Miriam Corbin's birthday. Miriam, happy birthday to you. That is incredible to hear. Hope you're getting ready for a great celebration, and I hope you're enjoying it even right now. We wish you a happy birthday indeed, Miriam, for sure. Let me get a couple of the other comments. Randy Hall. No, it wasn't Kyle Parker. It was the guy that started for him in 2017. I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. But the guy that started for them in 2017 was the one that tried out for WWE. Brandon Griffin says Kirby values experience at quarterback. As long as Beck isn't being careless with the ball, I think it's his job to lose. Yeah, that's been kind of the phrase that's been used a few times, that, certainly he's got sort of first crack at earning this, and then if he doesn't take advantage of that, then maybe something happens after that. Marshall Fleming says for the Gunner fans on here, he's not going to start this year. He would have to be far and away the best quarterback to start because both Brock and Beck would transfer, and Gunner would be our only quarterback, and Kirby does not want to be in that position again. I think there's a sense in which that the challenge for Gunner would be most sort of the more uphill challenge. He's just younger. Now, ultimately, I do believe if Gunner was by far and away the best quarterback, I do believe that Georgia would start him. I think that your overall point of these three quarterbacks, the one who would be most likely to transfer if he wasn't named starter would be Carson Beck, because at that point in time, he would wait around a good number of years. And if he were to be passed over again, well, he may just truly see the writing on the wall. So if he were not named a starter, he would probably be the most likely of that group to maybe transfer. You're probably right. In the case of Gunner, for the opposite reason, I think he's the least likely to transfer. I think that Gunner has a very bright future at Georgia. I really do. I think eventually Gunner Stockton is likely Georgia's starting quarterback. If that doesn't come this year, I don't think that's any big deal. I think what you've kind of seen with Georgia here over the course of the last year is after a lot of chaos at quarterback, and some of that chaos was just kind of generated by the pandemic, which generated a lot of chaos across the board in sports. What I think you're seeing Georgia return to is a certain sense of normalcy with its quarterback, where maybe this quarterback competition is going to be won by the oldest guy in the room, which sets up Brock Vandegrift after that, which maybe sets up Gunner Stockton after that, or whatever else. You may be seeing a sense of normalcy return to the Georgia quarterback situation, which might not be a bad thing. All right, let's see what else. Kelly Bryant. Alan, thank you very much. Kelly Bryant is the former Clemson quarterback who tried out for WWE. I don't know if he, aced the tryout or whatever else, but that's the one, Alan. Kelly Bryant had a WWE tryout. There's a whole bunch of, former college athletes that kind of got their, WWE tryout. Let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy. Yeah, I saw John Cena the other night. By the way, Cody got totally buried on Raw last night. So much for his day at the top of WWE. Keith Old says Gunner Stockton knew the depth we had at quarterback, and he still wanted to be a dog. I love that. Yeah, I think what you see right now is I think there are a handful of quarterbacks who are showing you they're actually a little bit more comfortable waiting. There was a period a few years ago where the thought was, oh my gosh, if you got this quarterback, you got to play him right away. Maybe that's kind of what Justin Fields expected to have happen here at UGA. But there are other examples of, like Bryce Young was not a starter his first year at Alabama. He sat the bench, and then he went on to be, he may end up being the number one overall pick. That was a guy that showed you some patience was worth it. C.J. Stroud showed some patience at Ohio State. But we actually have a little bit more of a track record lately where great college quarterbacks have sat and waited. They have been patient. They have watched and waited. They've learned from watching. And so, in Gunner Stockton's case, him being okay with needing to be patient kind of puts him in pretty good company because some very good college quarterbacks have been kind of okay with the same thing. Barry Watkins says he was shocked last night. Yeah, I won't spoil the ending for those of you who maybe have it on your DVR, but not a very good night for Cody on Raw. Not a very good night at all. Randy Hall says he thought it was Kelly Flair. Yeah, that's kind of funny. There's a bunch of other college athletes that had their tryouts. I mean, that's supposed to be what this kind of NIL thing is, right? Like the WWE NIL deals they have are supposed to be like prospect hunting type things for future wrestlers. In most cases, a lot of those guys gals won't become wrestlers, but just kind of trying to keep the pipeline going. By the way, on a more serious note, I mentioned this earlier. Sad about the passing of Dave Hallinger, former Georgia strength coach, very good player at West Virginia, longtime member of that Florida State program, close friend of Mark Rick's. Unexpectedly, I believe, passed away. I think he was living in Texas, and I believe it was whatever it was sudden. I don't have any medical details beyond that. Maybe some of the news reporting that's out there tells you more about that. But this was I don't believe he'd been battling illness, so incredibly sad. And I may have some of the facts wrong on that. I want to be careful not to say the wrong thing, but just very, very sad for Van Hallinger, who's a big part of this Georgia program for sure. DT says the WWE merger with UFC is tragic for UFC fans. I think for the most part the two, entities will be kept separate. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of bleed over between the two. Keith Dogg says there's a perfect work that comes from being patient. Trust me, I know firsthand in the making. Keith, I think that's really well said. And I do think that, I think that there's always going to be a special level of success reserved for people who are willing to go against the grain. When the entire world is transferring at a moment's notice and moving around, and in some cases hoping for multiple transfers, when that's common, the best way to succeed is to sort of stand out in an uncommon way. And sometimes that does mean sticking around and waiting your turn, learning, taking advantage. Because ultimately, one good year at a place like Georgia can be extremely valuable. I mean, you can be a part of a championship season. You can certainly get the kind of attention that would allow you to be a very high NFL draft pick. It just could be that 1 year playing in a place like Georgia could be far more valuable than multiple years playing somewhere else where you're kind of, you're just not able to succeed at that same level. And we may find that to be true with Carson Beck. Bill Russell says, is the league office going to release the 2024 schedule this summer? We might need to get reservations in Austin, Baton Rouge, etc. So I think we may hear the official word on the schedule format probably will next month. I would say, mid to late May, whenever those spring meetings take place in Destin. That is, I believe, when the SEC will make its official announcement about the scheduling format it's going to choose. And then I don't know how long after that we get the actual schedule itself, because what's going to be interesting to see is how much of the 2024 schedule that's already in place the SEC chooses to keep in place. For instance, 2024, I believe, is the designated year for Georgia to travel to Texas A&M for the first time. A&M's been in the league since 2012. Georgia still hasn't played at College Station. That's supposed to happen in 2024, but next season. But there's a chance the league just completely, reconfigures the schedule, and maybe that date to A&M doesn't happen yet. Now, based on what we expect the new format to be, it'll at least happen at some point in time in the next 4 years. But I think it'd be kind of funny if they just sort of punted it off, way into the future. So to answer your question, I believe I know when they're going to confirm the format. I believe that'll be next month. How soon after that do we get an SEC schedule? I'm not quite so sure. But I'm like you, for people who have to make their plans and things like that, finding out the schedule sooner rather than later would probably be a good thing. Senior Dog 54, also on the subject of patience, Brian Snicker. Snicker's the guy who waited a long time to be a Major League manager. And now he's going to go down as one of the most beloved Atlanta Braves of all time. That's a great example of that, Senior Dog. Great example of that. Ken Holcomb also, I like this line. He says, a golden glover for a golden shoe. I should have made that connection myself, but that's very good, Ken. He says, great choice. Best center fielder I've ever seen. Bobby Cox said that he played Jones through a slump at the plate because he has hits in his glove. That's about right, Ken. Very well said. Very well said. Johnny Surf Dog says Brock Bowers will throw a double pass for a touchdown this season. That's his hot take. I could see that. Yeah, I mean, they kind of did the throwback play on the 2-point conversion against LSU. I could see Brock Bowers doing something like that, and that could only add to his Heisman, be a Heisman-type play for him. I could see that. All right, back on YouTube. We'll take one more trip to the comments section. Woody Tripp 100 on the subject of Ryan Puglisi. Yeah, Georgia already does have one quarterback committed, but I believe they're going to try to, get another one here too. Foster Moss. No, I did not see Cena last night. I was flipping back and forth between Raw, Braves, tournament. So I didn't see Cena on Raw last night. So I have to go find that. I didn't see Cena on Raw last night. Let's see what else. So Nature Gator says that Simmons is not a running quarterback. Well, he just committed to Florida. Then how come they call him Muck Vick if he's not a runner? I thought that's why they called him Muck Vick. I think Florida fans are probably more interested in Mr. Simmons than I am. Let's see what else. A lot of folks in here talking about all kinds of things. Brandon Griffin on the subject of Alabama putting its hope in fragile players was something we've talked about before. I was kind of thinking about that. How do you feel if you're an Alabama fan? And the biggest question about Bryce Young going to the NFL draft is how small he is. And you just realize how much Alabama's program has changed. When it wasn't that long ago that Alabama was putting guys like Derrick Henry in the NFL, guys who are huge for their position. All of a sudden now the kind of defining player for the program, the face of the program, is a guy like Bryce Young, who's openly being asked, this guy's just simply too small, too thin, too short. It just sort of speaks out Alabama has changed as a program. The face of the program now is a player who's, even among, a smaller position in general, kind of small for the position. Changed it for sure. Foster Moss says, I didn't get it. What did I not get? What did I not get? Oh, the you can't see me thing. Oh yeah. I know that's been a big deal in sports this week. Let me tell you something. I've never been more happy not to be involved in a sports conversation than the whole you can't see me deal. I find all of that to be tedious. Let's see what else. G. Grace Bama Boy says, why would you read a comment from Brandon Ella? Who did I read? I can't tell what y'all are doing. I clearly y'all are having some fun at my expense, but I can't tell what it's for. All right. Jonathan Aaron says, why is the NFL team giving Richard so much love? We all saw what he could do in college. He says, if it's potential that they like, I say potentially be yeah. I've sort of said that myself, is that I'm not going to draft a quarterback like Anthony Richardson on potential at the front end of the first round. I'm just not going to do that. It's just too risky for me, for sure. Too risky for sure. All right, final comments when we get ready to go for today. On Facebook, very quick. A lot of folks kind of weighing in over here. Denise White Loper reminding us that Tua Tagovailoa is also small as well, and if that be the case, durability issues have been a little bit of an issue for Tua there as well. So yeah, there you go there on that. A couple other comments there as well. Barry Watkins says the Panthers are crazy to pass on Stroud and Young for AR-15. Totally agree on that. Listen, there's obviously a chance that Richardson does have great talent, that he could be good, but I just think that the safer bet's a guy like Stroud, who I at least see as an NFL level starter, and I think that if there's a superstar player, from this quarterback crop, I think it's likely to be Bryce Young. I just do. I think Bryce Young's a little bit more battle tested than the other guys are. I'll take Bryce Young over Caleb Williams. I've sort of said that there as well. For sure. Nick Roundtree says, has there ever been a back-to-back Mackey Award winner? I see Bowers making history this season. If not, I think that's a good question. I don't know if that has ever happened. That's a really good question. But obviously, in the case of Bowers, he probably should have won in 2021. So, he'd have a chance. If there was any justice in this world, he'd have a chance of getting that third one there as well. All right, we're going to wrap up for now. Y'all check out the AJC online, ajc.com. Great coverage of the Masters coming up. Always beautiful photos out of Augusta. Now, we'll see if the weather holds up for enough pretty photos. But no doubt, great Masters coverage, and obviously there's a bunch of crazy stuff going on in the news there too. If you want the serious news stuff, you can get all of that online, ajc.com there as well. We'll leave that alone, though. We will stay in balance here on our regular topic, but if you want the news stuff, you can get that online, ajc.com. And if you want your air conditioning tuned up and ready to go for a hot spring and summer, go to rsandrews.com on that. Find them online, rsandrews.com. For your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, they'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Our RS Andrews cool down after that. Talk to you then, everybody.